Hello, thank you for joining today's event, Women at the Table Accelerating FoRB, that is freedom of religion or belief. We will hear today from 6 amazing leaders who will focus on the findings and recommendations from our recent study, which we produced with the London-based organization Gender and Religious Freedom, and which was also funded by the Fetzer Institute. The leaders today represent a larger group of women and men from 22 countries and globally and 13 religious beliefs who participated in focus groups and individual interviews over the last year. From different perspectives, they all focus on the intersection of women and FoRB and have diverse institutional, professional, and religious backgrounds. The result of this effort is this study, the first global multi-faith analysis of women and FoRB. Because our event today is in 1 hour, we are responding to questions via email or also online discussion, open discussions we will be hosting in coming weeks. And that will give you an opportunity to get the questions answered and to join the conversation. I now want to introduce FoRB Women's Alliance co-founder Judith Golub, who will facilitate today's conversation with study participants.
Thank you so much, Lou, and thanks for your work on this event. Before we hear from the 5 panelists who participated in the research and from which FoRB Women Alliance learned so much, we'll hear from Elisa Chavez, who also participated in the study. Elisa will introduce us to the landscape and intersection of women and FoRB. Elisa is a human rights advisor at Stefanus Alliance International, a Norwegian-based missionary and human rights organization that has undertaken groundbreaking research on women and FoRB and is conducting awareness trainings worldwide. Elisa, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your participation in the research. Thank you for your work with Stefanus, and we look forward to your remarks.
Thank you so much, Judith, and thank you so much to also Lou for, or to both of you for the work you've done with FoRB Women's Alliance. It means a lot to have this allyship, and I think what has been for many of us a lonely field of trying to navigate the intersection between freedom of religion or belief and women's equality. So very much appreciate your efforts and your support in the work that we do in Stefanus Alliance. Just to share a bit from our own organization's experience, I think the human rights that Stefanus Alliance focuses mainly on is freedom of religion or belief for everyone, regardless of religious or belief identity. And it wasn't until about 4 or 5 years ago that we began to realize that FoRB violations actually look quite different for men and for women. And we had in fact been gender blind in the FoRB work that we had been doing so far. And I think that has been because of a number of different reasons. One, also coming from Norway, a secular context, we see often that secular gender equality actors and FoRB actors or religious actors often have not cooperated to promote these 2 rights as intersecting rights, as rights. They've actually, on the contrary, had a lot of misconception, or even there's been a disconnect between these 2 camps of human rights advocates. And I think for a long time also gender was perceived to be a threat to religion, to freedom of religion or belief for religious actors. And that's also why they have been distancing themselves from the secular gender camp. And vice versa, I think also from the secular gender equality camp, that there's been a misconception that religion always is discriminatory to women, that the only option for women is to free themselves of religion in order to have equality as women, which we also know is not the case. So there's been a lot of unexplored territory between and unexplored synergies between these 2 human rights advocacy camps. Another reason I think is because, as we see also in other fields of research, if we do not have a proactive gender perspective in the data collection we do, we effectively lose out on the perspectives, voices, and lived realities of women, just because of how the world is structured, and predominantly we have very patriarchal structures in society worldwide. Also in religious institutions, as an outside researcher, when you come into a religious community that you know has been under pressure or discriminated in their mainstream society context, that they often meet the religious leaders to ask questions of what kind of pressure they've been experiencing, what kind of violation, discrimination, and who are those leaders? They're often men, right, in the traditional leadership roles. So the men will give their perspectives on how they experience discrimination or violations of their religious freedom, but that's only half of the story, and often women's voices have not been included in those processes to do data collection on religious discrimination and persecution. I think also for a lot of minority communities, religious communities especially, that are under pressure, there's been a notion of trying to stick together as a community. So there has been little space to open up for debate on what kind of issues do we have within the community, especially in terms of raising internal issues like gender discrimination or gender inequality within religious communities, especially if they are under pressure as a group. So that's also, I think, we've seen there's been a lot of potential of improvement and trying to unpack some of those issues as well, and that actually addressing internal issues would not necessarily weaken a community that is already under pressure, but perhaps instead would strengthen it as a group. Then we also see that now that we have for the first time gendered research on FoRB violations, we see that some of the statistics show that the FoRB violations against women are often more complex than men. Women are often targeted both because of their religious or belief identity, but also because of their gender identity, and that these two things actually are quite intertwined, while for men, the violations are often not related to their gender in the same way, and there are less complex cases to unpack and to address in interventions or in human rights advocacy efforts. I think also just the type of violations that women will statistically experience compared to men, now that we are starting to have a little bit of data on that, is that these are often, for example, related to, or it looks like sexual violence, for example, or forced marriage or forced conversion. And it's interesting to see how these are statistically the most common FoRB violations against women, but for men, it often looks like imprisonment or killings or lack of economic opportunities. So we just offer some examples of how these violations, FoRB violations, look very differently and how they are gendered. So all this to say, I mean, the list continues. These are just some examples on the list of why we have previously not had a gender perspective in FoRB research and advocacy efforts. So I always say there's a big need to continue to unpack this, to understand it better, so we can also advocate for the human rights of women, including freedom of religion or belief. So I am very much looking forward to hear the panel later today, and also see where we can take this going forward, and try to promote women's freedom of religion or belief as well, because it has for a very long time been overlooked. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elisa. There is so much to unpack. So let's start unpacking. Let's introduce the panelists now. Panelists, could you please introduce yourselves? And I'll start with Rebecca Gadzama. Becky.
Hello. So nice to be part of your program today. My name is Rebecca Gadzama. I am the co-founder and director of Victims of Education Must Continue initiative. And I'm also a co-founder of a very recent organization I formed with other women called Gracious Street Smart Women Empowerment Academy. And both of these organizations is all about empowering the children and empowering the mothers and the girl child.
Great, thank you. Marjan.
I am Marjan Kapoor Greenblatt. I'm a human rights activist from Iran. My focus is on women and minorities in Iran, and I'm the founder of the Alliance for Rights of All Minorities, as well as Stop Femicide Iran. I am a non-resident fellow with MEI, and I'm the co-chair of ADL's Task Force for Middle East Minorities, and I'm very happy to be with all of you today.
Thank you. Fairness.
Hi, I've been working on issues related to women and religious minorities in Pakistan for the last 25 years. First as a journalist, then as a member of Pakistan's National Assembly, and most recently as a scholar based in the United States. I am also a co-founder of the Women's FoRB Alliance, which is hosting this event today, along with Lou and Judy. And the Women's FoRB Alliance has authored the research report we're discussing today. I have authored books on freedom of religion and belief, focusing on the persecution of religious minorities, minority faith communities, and my latest book, which I authored and edited, was published this year, called The Politics of Hate, Religious Majoritarianism in South Asia. And my previous work was titled Purifying the Land of the Pure, A History of Pakistan's Religious Minorities. I also work alongside Marjan on the ADL Task Force on Middle East Minorities, which is doing amazing work on Iran and many other countries in the Middle East. Thank you.
Thank you. Merritt Johnston.
Greetings. My name is Merritt Johnston, and I'm honored to serve as Executive Director of Baptist World Alliance Women, which is a network of women in more than 140 countries and territories united in our mission to impact the world, which includes in the areas of religious freedom, human rights, and justice. My thanks today to FoRB Women's Alliance for the opportunity to be part of this incredible research project and the impactful discussion today.
Thank you. Marcella Szymanski.
Yes, thank you very much for having me. I'm here calling from Brussels, where I work as an advocacy head of for the Pontifical Foundation Aid to the Church in Need. And I am the editor-in-chief of a religious freedom report that recenses the situation of Article 18 in 196 countries. We do that every 2 years, and I have been the editor-in-chief already for the 4th edition. The next one is going to come in the 22nd of June this year. And over these years, I have been able to meet a lot of the interesting women that are today around the table. And we are, I have learned a lot of the difference, not only of the way, as Elisa was saying, of how the women are presented or not presented in studies regarding freedom of religion, but also the different way that we women have in the approach of our work when it's about this important topic. We do not behave like guys. And that is very, very notorious for me in a world, of course, with the Catholic Church and everything, but everything is dominated by men. And all of a sudden, I have to realize that I am the only woman in the entire room. And but then I realized how much more at ease I am when I am working with other women, like the ones that you, Judith, Luan, and Faranas have been able to put together. I look forward to the success of this organization, and I'm ready to contribute to it as much as I can.
Thank you so much. So we listened to what these and other leaders told us as we interviewed them for the study, from which we produced 5 key findings and recommendations. Each panelist now will comment on a finding, and we'll start with Merritt. Merritt, could you read key finding 1 and comment on it, please?
Thank you. So key finding 1 says that both isolated networks and the siloing between FoRB rights and other sectors, especially women's rights, have disadvantaged women advocating for relief and redress and exacerbated their gendered experience of persecution on the basis of religion or belief. And as my colleagues have so eloquently addressed, we live in an ever-changing culture, but there is still a very real gendered reality that we are facing that is current. For some, there's a fear that gender-specific research and advocacy silos women and further perpetuates inequity. But the truth is that a gender-specific focus shines a needed spotlight on the reality. At Baptist World Alliance Women, we recently hosted a delegation at the 2023 United Nations Commission on the Status of Women in New York City. And a sobering statistic was shared in the opening session, citing that with our current trajectory, it will take 300 years to achieve equality and equity for women around the world. While I plan to live a long time, I am not certain that I will see that accomplished in my lifetime. So there's still much work to do. And it's critically important that we continue to seek opportunities for gender-specific advocacy. And as women, we are uniquely experienced and equipped to respond to the needs of women around our world. We have the passion, we see the needs, and we therefore are uniquely have this opportunity to respond. Likewise, we have to avoid siloing of freedom of religion and belief away from other human rights advocacy efforts. Religious freedom is a core human right guaranteed under international law within the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and affirmed in Article 18 of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Yet it's often removed from the conversation altogether when discussing women's rights, or even seen to be in opposition to equality for women. As stated by the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, harmful practices affecting women or girls cannot be accepted as legitimate manifestations of FoRB, because the assertion that one human right is used to distinguish another human right, it's untenable. Specifically, even within our Baptist history, religious freedom has long been a core value. Going back to a 1937 Baptist World Congress resolution, it declared the entire Baptist communion throughout the world to be resolutely opposed to religious repression of every kind, whether directed against Baptist or others, and expresses the unwavering sympathy of all our people for the victims of persecution or repression. But this commitment, it's not in isolation from other human rights, but rather an integral part of it. At the turn of the century in 2000, another Baptist World Congress resolution was passed, encouraging governments at every level to move swiftly and purposely to affirm actively and to respect unconditionally the human rights of all persons, including the right to worship God without fear of harassment or intrusion. Therefore, we affirm the result of the study findings for an integrated approach in which freedom of religion and belief is an integral part of a holistic view of human rights and human rights advocacy.
Thank you, Merritt. We could go on and talk about that, but we need to move on to key finding 2. Marjan, could you please read and comment on key finding 2?
Absolutely. Thank you for this opportunity and for this research you have done. Key finding number 2 states that exclusion from power structures additionally marginalizes, undermines, understudies, and under-resources efforts to address FoRB violations committed against women and girls and limits their capacity to effectively act. We know that efforts to address FoRB violations have often excluded women and gender-specific concerns. At times when organizations and institutions have tried to address these challenges, they have either implemented a male perspective, or they have been limited in their representation of the unique experiences of for women. Some groups have been actually intentional about their efforts, and they have tried to integrate women, but by and large, they have lacked representation from the process, which has led to the compounding problems that we see in the FoRB and gender discrimination formats. The compounding effects are paramount at every level. Women are ignored, marginalized, and persecuted in their communities, and advocacy efforts are not adequately representing them. They are absent or underrepresented at decision-making tables, and even though they have a wealth of knowledge and solutions to offer, they lack access to channels or proper formats for their advocacy capacities. I can personally attest to how this comes to play when it comes to the experience of women in Iran, and particularly religious women minorities in Iran, whether there are Sunni women and girls who are victims of femicide in the name of religion, or women who, due to their lack of beliefs in the Islamic codes, do not wish to wear the hijab, and they're experiencing significant violence as a result of that. This movement basically illustrates that there are mindset barriers, systematic barriers, and structural barriers that come into play when addressing the layers of persecution at the intersection of FoRB and women's issues. Throughout each one of these barriers, the layers of problems include the level of violence and discrimination that they experience because of their faith, or because faith is being weaponized against them. They face systematic barriers due to simple problems as easy as language barriers or lack of training and resources for the particular challenges that they have dealt with, including sexual violence and sexual trauma, and the lack of necessary medical or psychosocial resources to address them. And they face structural barriers where they cannot access the proper platforms for advocacy. And when they are finding themselves in a place where they can actually share their knowledge and resources, they are often describing those platforms as either silos or echo chambers, which illustrates that their voices are not being adequately heard by power structures that need to hear them. Although the finding is grim, we know that there are also solutions, and I look forward to discussing the solutions with the group later on. But the one takeaway that I want everyone to remember is that the movement is missing out on a key insight from women in the FoRB movement. And unless we are intentional about this inclusion practice, we are missing out on what a wealth of solutions that are there to be offered.
Thank you, Marjan. Next, we'll turn to Becky. Could you please read and then comment on key finding 3?
Yeah, key finding number 3 is says culture and religious norms can creatively and courageously be challenged. And for me, I like this particular solution or option because every word here is very positive and very encouraging. That the issue of religious norms and culture can be creatively and courageously challenged, and that is very true. The issue of culture and religious norms is a global challenge, and very unique to different countries and very specific, but generally it's an issue that affects women. And it is very positive and encouraging to know that the research says that we need to creatively and courageously challenge this. And the only thing I want to make on this is that it puts the woman in a very, as I see it as a paradox in the life of the woman, the issue of challenging or going around culture, religious norms, because the woman is caught up in between the two. She wants the freedom, like that we, especially the Freedom for Women Alliance, is advocating. It's the woman needs it, but at the same time, she needs her culture. So it is important for us to look at this thing, this paradox that the woman is caught in between. It's like two sides of one coin. On one side of the coin is the culture of the woman, her identity, her pride, her culture, her life, basically. Even though she is caught up in it and she's tied down, she's unable, as we can see, culture and religions maybe have not allowed the woman display, give to the society what she has. And she's stereotyped as the weaker sex and everything, but she still believes in her culture. She still, it's her pride, and it's her way of life, it's her security, it's her value system, it's herself. So this is what we are trying to see as a problem, to have freedom. So the woman is caught in between. She needs the freedom to express herself, the freedom to excel, the freedom to give to her society, the freedom to give to her children, the freedom to contribute to changing the world. She wants that. So she's caught in between. So what do we do? The woman I have can just be summarized as caught up in the Stockholm syndrome. She doesn't know what, because she needs it, but she seems to fear of the unknown, fear of going out of her society. She's stuck with the society. At the same time, so the issue of going, the challenge, the way it is put is very, very important. We need to understand that it has to be carefully and courageously done. Courageously in the sense that it is a long situation. The clutching, that the putting down of the woman by culture and religion is something that has been there for long, and it will be very difficult to take it off, because it has made the woman now very tied down to her society, to her culture. So we need to know how to maneuver around it and to be able to come up with it in such a way that without disturbing the culture, because the woman needs her culture. She needs freedom. So how do you go about it? It's like a coin. You need this side of the coin. On one side is culture, on the other side is freedom. So they cannot be thrown. So how do we maneuver around? How do we manage the culture? How do we manage the coin to still be useful, to still have our coin, and to give the woman the freedom to become what she is? Because really, and that is why I'm involved in helping women in capacity building and children, because the future of every society rests in the children. The men cannot alone, because they enjoy the culture. It empowers them. It gives them the freedom to do anything, but the woman is not. On the other hand, the woman is the burden carrier. She carries the most. She is the one that attends to the husband, attends to the children, attends to the people, but she doesn't have her own this. So we need to look at it very, very much. The culprit for me is, culture is a culprit. The woman is a victim, but then the woman doesn't know she's a victim, or she enjoys her being a victim. How do we help her? How do we go about it without hurting the culture that she believes in? And then get the trust that she can really be free and to express herself. So that is what I think we need to look at. And the question is very, I like the way the problem is formulated. We can make it. It's positive. It's doable.
Thank you, Becky. You raised a lot of issues. Let's turn now to Marcelo to please read and comment on key finding 4. Marcelo, are you there?
Yes. What happens is that I don't know if I have the complete phrase for the finding 4.
Okay, let me read.
Collaboration is a form of empowerment. Is that the one?
Yes, collaboration is a form of empowerment to increase capacity, influence, and relief.
Yes, exactly. Thank you very much. I have to turn off the camera because it just comes and goes and I look like I'm in a disco. But I wanted to tell you I wanted to share with you that you might have heard of a piece of advice from career coaches in the sense that you should never share with anyone what you plan to do, but only communicate about it once the results are in, and only when they go in your favor. I have noticed a fundamental difference between men and women in the professional demeanor in this area precisely of sharing, collaborating. Women tend naturally to share their plans, also without saying it, but in the hope to obtain useful feedback as they go forward. Like, for example, say, I am planning a trip to Nigeria, want to find more about the situation of women and children. And I've been in a situation recently also where men would tend to hold on to their thoughts and just say, oh yes, I was there last week. Oh, wow. No? And this happens in spite of the fact that you have been sharing with them about Nigeria for months. This is just a different working habit, but that one that in the field of religious freedom is very detrimental. Retaining information for ego protection or for company policy is far from being a virtue, and actually in our field of work actually harms the victims. On us women, besides, such behavior looks very devious. It doesn't come naturally. And sometimes it is even the company policy not to unveil the strategy, which more often than not is rather a fear of unveiling an empty plate. And then they don't help anyone, not themselves, not the victims, nor ourselves. So I think that on the contrary, when we share our thoughts, our plans, our actions, and certainly with like-minded women like the ones we are now sitting around here, we are helping one another in ways that we cannot imagine. I have the impression over the years that we might be more apt at learning from somebody else's experience. I think that is the case in general. And we better learn from somebody else's experience because we have lost centuries of progress as women in FoRB. We have a lot to catch up. And just look at after listening to our colleagues, to Elisa and all the others that have been speaking, when you look, for example, at the leadership pages of most of the organizations we have worked for or we work for currently, we only see men in the first 3 rows of the leadership page. And once you scroll down until the second layer of management or decision making, then you see, and it's mostly women. Secretaries general are most of the time guys. I'm very happy that not in this little circle today, they are all guys. But the heads of projects, the outreach strategies, communications, all are women. And I wonder how many among us here has a boss that is not a man. I believe that by collaborating across organizations, we really achieve results and do it more rapidly. I have seen it happening in various countries that I have visited or lived in, but we have to be persistent, coherent always with this principle and share, because that comes naturally to us. And certainly we must not care if the company policy is not to share our plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcelo. We're now to turn to Stefanus. Please read and comment on key finding 5.
Thank you, Judy. Key finding number 5 reads, structural change is the necessary accelerator for addressing women and FoRB rights and requires an external catalyst. It is not within the agency of the unempowered to have the necessary resources or create a space for themselves at the table. To me, this is something which is very, very crucial. I think since the beginning of time, the focus has always been, whether it's from the women's rights perspective or the FoRB rights perspective, has always been that the people who actually have the least amount of power in a nation, in a society, in a culture, and within a faith group, that it's up to them somehow to solve the issues. It is what I call, women and who are suffering because of discrimination and a violation of themselves because they belong to smaller faith groups. Those women, how do we expect them, the most marginalized, to be the ones at a table? They're simply not invited. So what's needed is a consistent approach across the board at a much higher level. And I really agree with what Lisa had to say in the beginning. Basically, these two groups, the women's rights groups I have worked with, whether they were in Pakistan, all over South Asia, Muslim world women's groups, and those groups which focus on freedom of religion or belief, religious freedom, the rights of minority communities, they not just do not work together, they look at each other as being detrimental, as being the issue. From, if it's a women's rights advocate, that women's rights are held back by religion. So you cannot talk about women in FoRB. And a lot of FoRB rights activists and specialists feel that the women and gender perspective is all wrong, that you should look within the faith to find the answers, and that gender is a lens which does not work with religion. So this is the number one issue. So creating structural change to be the necessary accelerator for addressing women and FoRB rights needs an external catalyst. So the number one thing that needs to be changed is bringing these groups together and having that consistent approach across the board. So where do we look? We look at, from the donors, for example, you can look at USAID, the UN, corporations and nonprofits. At the moment, there's little interest in FoRB issues and discomfort with religion. Also, very often, their women's programs have to focus on FoRB as an important human rights issue and be consistent. For example, whatever the US government or other big donor countries are interested in becomes the direction. Because Iraq was the US's big focus, therefore, the persecution and the terrible brutalities visited on Yazidi women became an international issue. If the US had had no internal contact with Iraq, strategic contact, Yazidi women would never have been heard about or what ISIS perpetrated on them. Today, why is everyone talking about Hazara women? Yes, we should be talking about Hazara women, whether they are in Pakistan or Afghanistan. But it's because, again, the Taliban in Afghanistan have become important to the West, and therefore there's an interest in Hazara women. So the problem is the moment the West is no longer interested in Iraq or Afghanistan, the interest will be lost, like a lot of Yazidi women activists tell us. So number one, there needs to be more funding for women and FoRB issues as concentrated as one issue from governments, corporations, and foundations. Secondly, international multilateral organizations such as the UN, the World Bank, UNDP, and the UN Women's Program need to include women's particular FoRB-related issues on their agenda for both funding and action. Thirdly, USAID must include women and FoRB-related programs in its plan for less developed countries. So basically, overall, it's a mammoth challenge, but there has to be a start. Whether they start with the legal issues, the constitutional provisions or protections, or the education of the population to change the societal attitudes, or the greater incorporation of women and minorities in positions of power and decision-making, external support from international institutions and governments is crucial. And I will give you a little example today of going back again to Lisa, her point about how very often male religious leaders are not interested, are embarrassed, and don't want to talk about rape issues dealing with their women in their faith communities and many other issues of this kind. But today, for example, I see a little ray of hope in Pakistan. For the first time, you see Christian and Hindu male clerics leading the conversation about the forced conversion and the forced marriages of underage Hindu and Christian girls and young women. And that is something which is very new. So it can happen, but there has been a lot of effort from international nonprofits and other entities to get to this issue. So thank you very much, Judy, for letting me share my thoughts.
Thank you. This has been a very, very rich discussion. We could go on for hours talking about what everybody raised. I want to very briefly summarize the recommendations, and then this is going to date me. We're going to do like speed dating, speed answers. If anyone wants to comment on the recommendations, I'm happy to, but I want to leave time for our last segment, so your answers will be speedy, hopefully. So I'm going to summarize the recommendations. The importance of training and education, 1. 2, the need for more information, especially that gleaned from qualitative and quantitative research. We simply don't have enough information. 3, as we heard before, collaboration is essential with safe spaces and platforms. 4, the need to include issues related to women and FoRB to further dimension existing projects. 5, the future vitality and health of the movement depends on supporting women and FoRB. And finally, 6, women leaders should be equal partners and participants in FoRB programs, policy makings, and implementation. In summary, they need to be at the table. So to start our speed comment response, Marcella, give us a quick comment, and then I'd like other people to give us their comments very quickly. We have about 5-6 minutes for this whole section. Thank you, Marcella.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, it was very, very interesting to hear what all the colleagues have to say about this, what all the great things that we can do together as women in FoRB, both for to put the issue on a different perspective and to work together. And in this sense, I mean, I wanted to say about this qualitative and quantitative data need that it was just mentioned. It is very important that we overcome one particular factor, which is the habit of not denouncing the violations of FoRB of which we as women are the object. Why? Because for some reason, women want to forgive much more quickly and prefer not to go and denounce that they have been a victim. The women that I talk to, sometimes they say, but I cannot say who attacked me. And I said, but you don't have to accuse someone. You just have to declare yourself a victim with a particular authority so that we outsiders who can help you to find the access to the advocacy channels that you need have something to rely upon, that we can say, this has happened 20 times to people like this, this has happened 30 times in that region, and that there is a record. And that kind of solid data, it is something that we really have to take very seriously in matters of FoRB. We have to encourage every woman and every man, of course, but particularly every woman, to make a formal complaint with whatever formal authority may exist in that area. And then in the form of collaboration, I also, when the issue of particular projects that we can have as women or where women could have a different impact, I think that when I hear you talking about how the victims of violations, women, do not have access to justice and do not have access to the advocacy channels, I know that, but then I realize that in general, a victim is not the same as an advocate, and we have to make an additional effort ourselves, because we are so conscious about this, to help the victims articulate their message, and then we as advocates, the ones who do advocacy, we bring it to the pertinent, relevant decision-making powers. But it is a teamwork. We cannot hope that the witness herself becomes her own advocate. Not always. Thank you.
Does anyone have other comments they'd like to make on their recommendations?
Yeah, maybe.
Go ahead, Becky.
Okay, just want to add on what can make women. Women need to realize that they are in a difficult situations, and they can get out of it. The society needs them, because the putting down of women over the years, over the ages, is partly part of why the society is always every year going backward in terms of justice, in terms of moral, in terms of raising children. It has to do with the fact that the mothers, the women, are put down, and their expertise that God has put them are not being able to be tapped. So one of the ways, women are never going to get it easy. And that is why I like this, my number 3, the way they have put it. But there's a way that we can go about it. Women will not get it. The only way women can get it is one of the ways is to empower them, especially economically, because everybody wants to be identified with success. Men wants to have successful women, even though they don't want to build a successful woman because they fear being overshadowed by the woman. So part of what we can do, what we have to do to help women realize that they are in a challenge, is to empower them and let them realize their potentials and what they can do to make a difference in the society, giving them voice. Empowerment, economic empowerment is very, very important.
Thank you. Farnaz and then Elisa.
Okay, a final thing, comment on number 6, which was really, I commented on in the report, and it talked about having women at the banquet table specifically. And without women at the table, there's really no point of having this event or doing this research. Women have to be on the table, and therefore, when all of us with nonprofits and everything have funders, we have to insist on not all women, because then the people who can actually bring change are men. So you have to ask for gender parity. So there are men at the table along with the women, and that helps frame the issue. It's a very sad reality, and I feel terrible as a feminist saying it, but that's a crucial thing. So to get to the decision makers, basically, we have to bring it up at every level that we want gender parity for whatever project that we are talking about. So it's not overrun by men, which happens manals in Washington. You know, the subject could be anything and you'll only see men. So you don't want that. So insisting on gender parity, I think, is the way forward. Thank you.
Great. Elisa.
Thank you. Just a very quick comment before I go on to my point, to Farah's point. And I think it's important to recognize that not only women are champions of women's rights, right? Men are often also important allies in achieving gender equality. So yes, we do need to have men at the table as much as we need to have women at the table, because we need both perspectives and we need each other to solve this issue of inequality and gender discrimination, because women can't do it alone. And I think also women are often part of the problem, right? When it comes to upholding patriarchal structures and gender discriminatory norms, women are often play an important and active role in this. So we need to work together among women and also in our allyship with men who are champions of gender equality. And my other point that I wanted to just touch upon in terms of collaboration, one thing that I've found very helpful in my own work is also reaching out to, again, because there has been this disconnect between the secular gender activists and the FoRB activists or religious actors, to try to bridge this gap. Because the fact is that gender actors, secular gender actors, can access areas in society and open doors that religious actors or FoRB actors cannot access, and vice versa. So if we come together and try to work together in terms of protecting and advocating for the equality and rights of religious women, of women who are discriminated against because of their religious or belief identity, I think that is really the only way or the most fruitful way to move forward to bridge this gap that has previously been between human rights advocates.
Thank you. I'm worrying about time and like to move on to final comments. This is so rich. We could have an hour, 2 hours on this, and I'm sorry to move us on, but I'd like to end with the panelists briefly sharing what matters to them most. And let's start with Marjan.
What matters to me most is really opportunity, but it is opportunity to participate and engage in all of these areas that are mentioned, from training to fundraising to implementation. And this is really what the data is showing us, that women are kept away from opportunities at all of these layers. And I think that one thing that happens, and that probably also goes to the training, is that when finally the opportunity is presented and women are able to participate alongside men in finding solutions that will benefit all of us, I think that what needs to be emphasized is the importance of civility and the ability for men and women of different cultures, of different societal norms, to sit together and respectfully engage with one another. I think what happens, having been in around some of those tables myself, I recognize that I'm the only kind of representing a specific perspective, and others don't understand how to speak to me. I am just personalizing it, but I realize that there are other women who have found themselves in that very unique position. And I think it requires cultural competencies as well as gender competencies in order for people to learn a civil language, to engage, and to learn from one another in order to overcome the barriers of timidity, both cultural and also individual, that may appear. And then with that also, I see that there are courageous women Becky mentioned that it's important to be courageous in this field, but I see courageous women overcoming some of the societal barriers, and they're voicing what they need, but they're attacked from all angles of the society because they are exhibiting this courage. And I think that in the spirit of collaboration that has been beautifully stated in this research, we have to stand up for women who are being attacked, from internal and external forces in their communities and outside. We need to stand with them and support their courage and praise their courage in order to continue their fight as we join them.
Thank you so much. Next, let's turn to Merit.
I think one of my greatest concerns is the rise of polarization and the bent to pursue divide rather than honor diversity. In fact, this seems to be the most polarizing time I can recall in my lifetime, which is incredibly dangerous when we can no longer see diversity as a source of value rather than as a threat. And this polarization, it's a harbinger not only for much of what I believe is our current societal discord, but also for an escalation of religious freedom challenges. So this polarization that's contributing to religious persons becoming, sadly, some of the greatest threats to religious freedom, as religious uniformity becomes the focus rather than recognizing the importance of freedom of belief for all. So within faith context, we have to recommit to religious freedom for all people. Because a world in which there's religious freedom for me, but in which others face persecution is not religious freedom at all. So my advocacy and the advocacy of others should not be motivated merely by my personal belief or need, but rather by a care and concern for the well-being of all people. And this polarization is also seen in segments of religious institutions which have become hyper-focused on restricting women's roles and rights, specifically within Christian context. We must seek to educate our faith communities about the danger of misinterpretation of biblical text through a patriarchal lens and the misapplication of key passages for the purpose of subjugation and, even at its darkest point, abuse. Without representation in faith communities, it's impossible to effectively advocate for women's rights. So across our religious entities, we must seek opportunities for women to have a seat at every table. And to me, the most effective way to combat polarization is partnership, collaborating together through communities like FoRB Women's Alliance to unite in advocacy through our shared goals, rather than standing alone in our differences.
Thank you. Becky.
Yeah, my own take for recommendation is how we can, women can rediscover themselves and know their values and work together as women, trusting each other, having confidence in each other. Because in my own part of the world, for whatever reason, women seem to be more aligned to the men. Well, not for whatever reason, the culture makes it that way, but even on political issues, it's very difficult for women to support women. And I think this is something we have to do. We have to work on to make women realize that it is in the team, in the oneness, the teamwork, the trust, the confidence, the realization. We discover that we have been under Stockholm syndrome that can, and getting out of it, that can make women work together and to participate and get women in the system, in leadership positions, to continue to make a positive change, because the system suffers because of the woman's absence in terms of contributing to the society. And I also want to talk about mentorship. There has to be some mentorship between mothers or women and the girl child on how to be strong, in especially these generations. They can be a lot different than where I'm coming from and when I was started.
Thank you, Becky. Stefanus, final thoughts.
Final thoughts. I am coming back to this, how important this report is and why, as it's new research, it's so valuable, and all of us really need to spread the word, because so many people, most people around the globe, are not even aware of the issues, let alone the solutions that are needed, that the report reflects. And so I think that is very crucial. And the second point I'd make, to anybody, whether it's merit as a Baptist woman or whether it's me as a Shia woman who doesn't work on the rights of Shia women. I work on the rights of women, Hindus and Christians and Jews. This has to be above and beyond us, you, me, and all of us. We have to work for a minimum of tolerance for all women of persecuted faith communities. We have to convey something larger than just what moves us personally. So those are my concluding thoughts. Judy, thank you very much.
Thank you. Marcella, final comments. I think she's having a little trouble with her feed. Let's turn to Elisa and then we'll go back to Marcella.
Here it is.
Oh, thank you,
I mean,
Marcella.
without the video, probably. Yeah. No, but it's very, very important to me this time when discovering you is really to have a network where I can share my network and that we can multiply the kind of work that we do where only women can do it. We have this very painful situation in all these projects of aid to the church in need, where there is violence and the women are the ones that are suffering the attack first, or they are the ones that are abused sexually, in which we need to have more women on the ground giving the psychological trauma counseling. Just that. A woman who has been abused will seek naturally another woman when she needs advice. And they are so few. So I went in an IDP camp in Nigeria, and I realized that they are looking for women, but they are so few. And women over there, they have no time because they have to take care of the children and of the elderly, etc. So what we can do with our different capacities, our different gifts as a network of women, is to organize a complete supply chain for the liberation of these women that have been victims by, for example, providing not only the training to the one who's going to be as the counselor for the psychological trauma, but also for the women who could take care of her children and the elderly parents and prepare food while she is busy giving these other resources, because we have them in the West, but we realize very late that these simple things like who's going to cook for the family are crucial to introduce women more into the chain of supply of help to other women that have been suffering for things related to their religion, in this case in Nigeria, because they have been attacked by hordes of Islamist extremists. So I think that there are many projects like that I already have in mind that are very, very important to me, how to introduce an entire supply chain of services for women by women. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll end comments with Elisa.
Thank you, Judith, and thank you to the panelists. It's been very inspiring to listen to all of you. I think as a human rights activist, I think more so increasingly, I'm seeing the need for intersectionality in human rights and also just acknowledging why we need to have an intersectional approach with human rights violations, because we are complex individuals. We have several layers to our identity. We have a race, we have an age, we have maybe have a disability, we might have a migration status. We have different gender identities, sexual orientations, and I think just keeping that in mind is also, we have different religious or beliefs, right? So keeping in mind how complex we are as individuals is also kind of grounds for having an intersectional approach in human rights, and specifically for FoRB and women's rights. For example, encourage and support theological reflections around women's value and women's rights. Also, respecting women's agency. Women are often referred to as victims or passive recipients of help, but women have a voice. They just need to be empowered to use that voice. So I think raising awareness on just these issues can have potentially massive ring effects, hopefully for a change for a better future.
Thank you so much. I have heard from a lot of empowered women today, so thank you. It was a very, very rich discussion. I think we only touched the surface of it. I thank you for your participation. And I want to end by emphasizing a concept that is central to FoRB Women Alliance and central to all you. We are stronger together. So I want to end this by turning it over to my colleague, Luann. So Luann, please, you're on. You're on mute.
Thank you very much. Thank you, panelists. Thank you to my co-founders. Profound thanks, Judith and Stefanus, for your work over the last 5 years to get to this point. Just as a business accelerator gives companies access to mentorship, to training, to funding, and other support so they can become stable and self-sufficient and to flourish, FoRB Women's Alliance as a women's human rights accelerator does the same. We strive to identify gaps and resources for one reason: to help you and advocates at the local, the national, and global level be more impactful. As Judy said, we're not starting anything. We are joining you. So both the study's key findings and recommendations that you all discussed today center on how to advance pragmatic solutions. That's really critical for advancing freedom of religion or belief. And let's end hopeful. The good news is that identifying and supporting these changes, each one of you can make a significant difference and expand the opportunities to accelerate for all. So in closing, I have one question for everyone attending. How can FoRB Women's Alliance help? We thank you very much for attending today. We would like to hear from you, and you can access the report on our website and this recording at forbwomen.org. Thank you.